Today we're tackling a question that honestly feels more relevant every single day. How can genuinely good people be so incredibly divided?
It's everywhere, isn't it? The political arguments, the sense that cooperation is just
Yeah,
collapsing.
exactly. And that feeling, that kind of constant conflict, is why we're doing a deep dive today into Jonathan Haidt's really, really influential book, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion.
Yeah, that's a fantastic book. And it's not just, another political commentary. Haidt really goes deep into the fundamentals of morality itself. How do we even form our judgments? Why are we often so certain we're right and while everyone else is wrong?
He offers a different perspective, right? Something that might help explain the landscape we're seeing.
Absolutely. It's often quite surprising, actually. He sheds a lot of light on human nature and, why even people with the best intentions can end up completely at odds. So our mission today is really to unpack his journey, look at how he challenges some old assumptions about morality, and see what it tells us about how our minds actually work.
Okay, let's get into it. Where should we start? Maybe with one of the core ideas from The Righteous Mind, that kind of startling idea that our moral judgments, well, they don't really come from slow, careful reasoning.
That's perfect. Yeah, this is fundamental to Haidt's argument. It's the idea that our gut feelings, our moral intuitions, they come first, almost instantly. And our reasoning, it often just follows along behind, kind of playing catch up, trying to justify what we already feel.
Right, the justification comes after the feeling. He had some experiments that showed this, didn't he? The moral dumbfounding thing.
Exactly. Moral dumbfounding. It's fascinating. He gives people these scenarios that were designed to be harmless, but still feel, well, icky or wrong. Like a family respectfully eating their pet dog after it died in an accident, or adult siblings having consensual sex using birth control.
Okay, yeah, those definitely trigger a yuck feeling, even if you can't immediately point to harm.
Precisely. People would immediately say, oh, that's wrong. But then when Haidt asked them why it was wrong, they'd really struggle. They'd grasp for reasons, maybe invent harms that weren't there, or eventually just say something like, I don't know, I can't explain it. I just know it's wrong.
Wow, so they were dumbfounded.
Yeah. And this really flew in the face of a lot of traditional thinking about moral development. People like Piaget or Kohlberg, they focus so much on how kids reason about fairness and harm. But Haidt was showing that these quick, intuitive judgments often came first, and the reasoning was, well, often just absent or fabricated later. People were literally rendered speechless, as he put it.
So our gut gives the verdict, and our brain scrambles to write the legal opinion afterwards. How does Haidt actually explain that? It feels so backward compared to how we usually think about decision-making.
He uses a brilliant metaphor, the rider and the elephant. He took philosopher David Hume's idea. Hume said, reason is the servant of the passions, and updated it. Haidt says, reason is the servant of the intuitions.
Okay, rider and elephant. Break that down for us.
So the elephant is our intuition. It's the fast, automatic, unconscious stuff, our gut feelings, our emotions, that instant seeing that something is good or bad. The elephant is huge, powerful, and it's pretty much running the show, making these instant judgments all the time.
And the rider?
The rider is our conscious reasoning. It's the slower, controlled process, the reasoning why. But here's the key. Haidt argues the rider's main job isn't usually to steer the elephant towards objective truth. It's more like the elephant's press secretary.
A press secretary. You mean like spin control?
Kind of, yeah. The rider's primary role is to rationalize the elephant's movements after it's already started moving, to justify the gut feeling, or maybe to help persuade other people's elephants. Actual private reflection, where the rider manages to genuinely change the elephant's mind or direction. Haidt says that's actually pretty rare.
So the elephant just goes where it wants, and the rider is clinging on, shouting justifications. That's quite a shift in thinking about ourselves. It makes you feel a bit less in control, doesn't it?
It really does. And there's a ton of evidence supporting this idea that intuition comes first. I mean, think about it. Our brains constantly make instant good-bad evaluations, sometimes before we even consciously register what we're looking at. Psychologists call it the mere exposure effect. Just being familiar with something makes us tag it as slightly better, slightly safer.
Right, like why brands advertise so much, just to make the name familiar.
Exactly. And it goes deeper. Even subtle things like seeing a negative word flashed really quickly can make your later judgments harsher. Or, and this is one Haidt highlights in the book, subtle bodily states. There was this one study where researchers used, believe it or not, fart spray.
Fart spray, seriously?
Seriously, just a faint bad smell in the air. And people exposed to it without consciously noticing it sometimes actually became more morally judgmental in their answers to questionnaires. It shows this direct, almost primal link between physical sensations, disgust, and our moral intuition.
Wow. So it's not just abstract principles floating around in our heads, it's deeply connected to our bodies and our environment.
Definitely not just abstract thought. And look at the contrast between, say, psychopaths and babies.
Yeah.
Psychopaths can often reason quite well. They might even ace tests on moral dilemmas in theory.
Yeah.
But they lack the core moral emotions, empathy, guilt, shame. And what happens? Their lives often fall apart because they make terrible real-world decisions. They can't maintain relationships. They don't feel the weight of their actions.
Okay, so reasoning without the feeling isn't enough. What about babies?
Babies are the opposite. They can't reason yet, obviously, but they clearly feel. Studies show tiny infants, like 6 months old, already prefer puppets who act nicely towards others over puppets who act meanly. It suggests this basic moral intuition, this preference for good over bad, care over harm, is there long before complex reasoning or even language develops. It's fundamental.
And brain scans back this up too, right? Like with the trolley problem.
Oh, yeah. Jonathan Green's work using fMRI on things like the trolley problem, would you push one person onto the tracks to save 5, shows that the emotional centers of the brain light up immediately when people consider these dilemmas. And the pattern of that emotional activation strongly predicts the moral judgment they'll make. It really reinforces this picture. Intuition, the elephant, makes the first move.
So let's pull this together. What's the big takeaway here? If our intuition leads and reasoning follows, mostly just justifying things, what's reasoning actually for then? It sounds like it's not really about finding the capital T truth.
That's Haidt's point. Its primary function seems to be more about social strategy, justifying our actions and judgments to ourselves so we feel good about ourselves, persuading others to see things our way or join our side, protecting our reputation within our group.
Like that old thought experiment, the ring of Gyges. If you were invisible, would you still be good? Haidt suggests maybe not always, because a lot of our morality is tied to how others see us.
Exactly. He talks about us having an inner lawyer or a press secretary in our heads. It's incredibly skilled at finding justifications for what we want to believe or what we've already done. So skilled, in fact, that we often genuinely convince ourselves of our own righteousness, even when we might be, bending the rules a bit. It's not a bug, he argues. It's a feature of how our argumentative minds evolved.
Okay, so if our minds are built to justify and persuade, not necessarily to find objective truth, that really changes how we should think about arguments and disagreements, doesn't it? Maybe yelling facts at someone isn't the best strategy if their elephant is already heading in the other direction.
That's a huge implication, definitely.
All right, so we've established that our minds tend to work on intuition first, justification second. Our inner elephant leads the way. So the next big question is, where do these intuitions, these gut feelings, actually come from? And this is where Haidt takes us beyond the usual answers, arguing that the typical Western focus on just harm and fairness is, well, it's missing a lot.
It really is. He introduces this very important concept he calls the weird problem.
Weird? What does that stand for?
It stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Haidt points out that the vast majority of psychology research for decades has been done almost exclusively on people from these weird societies.
And the problem is?
The problem is that weird people are not representative of humanity as a whole. In fact, globally speaking, weird cultures are statistical outliers. People in these cultures tend to see the world more in terms of separate objects rather than relationships. They think more analytically, and this leads to a particular kind of morality, one that's very individualistic and focused on rules, rights, and principles. Think of philosophers like Kant or Mill, focusing on reason and universal rules about harm and fairness.
So we've basically been studying a very specific, unusual slice of humanity and assuming it applies to everyone.
Pretty much. And Haidt argues this narrow, weird lens, emphasizing primarily harm and fairness, fails to capture the full spectrum, the true richness of human moral concerns across different cultures and throughout history.
Okay, so if harm and fairness isn't the whole story, what is the full picture, according to Haidt? What are the other moral dimensions we're missing?
This is where he introduces his moral foundations theory. He describes it beautifully, actually, as like having 6 moral taste receptors on our tongue, just like we have receptors for sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. He proposes we have these innate psychological foundations for morality. They're universal, but culture tunes how sensitive we are to each one and how we express them.
6 taste receptors for morality. I like that analogy. Where did he get these from?
A big influence was the anthropologist Richard Schwitter. Schwitter studied morality in India and found that people there consistently talked about moral issues that went way beyond just preventing harm or ensuring fairness. He identified what he called three ethics: the ethic of autonomy, focused on individual rights, harm, freedom, the weird focus, but also the ethic of community, emphasizing duty, loyalty, hierarchy, interdependence, and the ethic of divinity, focused on purity, sanctity, avoiding degradation, living in a more noble way. This really opened Haidt's eyes.
So Schwitter showed there was more out there than just autonomy. How did Haidt build on that to get his 6 foundations?
He synthesized work from evolutionary psychology, anthropology, cultural psychology, and developed these 6 foundations. The first one is care harm. This is the one we're probably most familiar with. It's our evolved sensitivity to suffering, vulnerability, and cruelty. It makes us feel compassion, protects offspring, makes us recoil from violence. Think cute babies, images of suffering that activates this foundation.
Okay, that makes sense. Empathy, basically. What's number 2?
Second is fairness cheating. This is about intuitive justice, reciprocity, proportionality. The idea that people should reap what they sow, get what they deserve. It makes us angry at cheaters, free riders, people who exploit systems. Importantly, Haidt distinguishes this from just simple equality of outcomes. It's more about karma, proportionality, and reciprocal altruism.
Right, so getting what you deserve, not necessarily everyone getting Okay, what's the third?
Third is loyalty betrayal. This is rooted in our long history as tribal creatures needing to form cohesive groups to survive. It makes us value group cohesion, patriotism, self-sacrifice for the team. It also makes us feel strong emotions about traitors or anyone who undermines the group. Think about intense feelings around sports teams, national flags, or military units.
Okay, care and fairness feel pretty standard, maybe. But loyalty. You can see how that might start to explain some group conflicts, can't you? That tribal instinct, the last 3. These seem like they might be even less familiar to, say, a typical weird perspective.
They often are. Fourth is authority subversion. This foundation is about respect for legitimate authority, tradition, and social order. It's rooted in our history of living in hierarchical groups. It makes us value leadership, deference, stability, and makes us wary of chaos and subversion. Think about respect for elders, established rules, traditions, institutions.
It's authority. Yeah, that one definitely plays differently across a political spectrum. Okay, fifth.
Fifth is sanctity degradation, sometimes called purity. This is based on the emotion of disgust and our intuition that some things are sacred, pure, or noble, while others are degrading, contaminated, or polluting. It originally evolved, perhaps, to help us avoid pathogens and toxins, the omnivore's dilemma of trying new foods but avoiding poison, but it got elaborated culturally into ideas about spiritual purity, protecting sacred objects or places, condemning things seen as unnatural or degrading to human dignity. Think food taboos, flag desecration, protecting institutions from moral decay.
Sanctity, like feeling something is holy or just inviolable.
Exactly. And finally, Haidt proposes a 6th foundation, which he considers a bit more provisional but still important: liberty oppression. This is that feeling of righteous anger and resistance against domination, coercion, and bullying. It's the don't tread on me impulse. It fuels revolutions and makes us stand up to tyrants. Interestingly, this foundation often works in tension with the authority foundation.
Wow, okay. Care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty. It's a much broader palette than just harm and fairness. So how does this map onto politics? You said this is where it gets really interesting.
It really does. Haidt and his colleagues developed the Moral Foundations Questionnaire, MFQ, and gave it to hundreds of thousands of people. And the patterns are striking. Liberals, broadly speaking, tend to rely very heavily on the first 2 or 3 foundations. Care harm is paramount. Fairness, often interpreted as equality or fighting oppression, is crucial. And liberty oppression, specifically focused on protecting vulnerable groups from dominant ones, is also very important.
So liberals have a more focused moral toolkit, primarily care, fairness, and liberty for the oppressed.
Generally, yes. Conservatives, on the other hand, tend to use all 6 foundations more equally. They certainly care about care, fairness, and liberty too, but they give much greater weight compared to liberals to loyalty, authority, and sanctity.
So conservatives have a broader, more evenly balanced set of moral concerns drawing on all 6.
That's what the data strongly suggests. And this difference in the moral palette explains so much about political disagreements. It explains why arguments that seem utterly compelling to one side completely fail to register with the other. If you're making an argument based purely on compassion, care, but the other person is weighing that against concerns about group loyalty or respecting tradition, loyalty, authority, you're just talking past each other.
It's like trying to describe the taste of food using only sweet and sour to someone who can also taste bitter, salty, and umami.
Exactly. It explains why certain political messages resonate and others flop. It helps explain, for instance, why many working-class voters might support conservative parties, even if some liberal policies might seem more economically beneficial to them. They might be voting based on deeply felt moral values related to loyalty, authority, or sanctity that liberal messages often don't even acknowledge.
That makes a lot of sense. Understanding these different moral foundations seems key to understanding the divide.
It's a crucial piece of the puzzle, Haidt argues.
Okay, so we have our intuitive elephant, guided by this broader palette of 6 moral foundations. Now we get to Haidt's third big principle in the righteous mind. It's about how morality binds us together into groups, but, and this is the kicker, it also blinds us to the perspectives of other groups.
Right, this is where he introduces that memorable phrase, humans are 90% chimp, 10% bee.
90% chimp, 10% bee, meaning,
yes, we are largely self-interested primates like chimps, competing for status and resources. That's the 90%. But we also have this remarkable capacity for groupishness, this ability to transcend self-interest and function like bees in a hive, working together for the good of the group. That's the 10%.
So we have this switch almost that can make us more like bees, more collective.
Exactly. He calls it the hive switch. Humans aren't always in hive mode. We're conditional hive creatures. But under certain conditions, we can temporarily suppress our everyday selfishness and feel part of something larger than ourselves, a collective we.
And what flips this switch? What makes us feel like part of a hive?
Haidt points to several triggers, things that create what the sociologist Emil Durkheim called collective effervescence. Think about moments of shared emotion in a crowd, like at a concert, a religious service, or a political rally. A sense of awe, maybe looking at nature or witnessing an act of great heroism, can do it. Also, things involving synchronized movement, what he calls muscular bonding.
Muscular bonding, like marching together.
Yeah, exactly. Marching in an army, chanting or singing together, dancing in unison at a rave or a traditional ceremony. These kinds of activities seem to dissolve the sense of self and create a powerful feeling of unity, of being simply a part of a whole, as Durkheim said.
And there's biology behind this.
Oh, for sure. Oxytocin, the hormone involved in bonding and trust, plays a big role. But here's a crucial detail Haidt emphasizes. Oxytocin primarily bonds us to our group, our in-group. It doesn't necessarily make us nicer to everyone. It can actually increase defensiveness towards outgroups. It fuels what he calls parochial altruism, intense cooperation within the group, potentially alongside indifference or hostility between groups. Right. Mirror neurons also play a part, helping us feel what others feel, especially those we perceive as being like us.
Wow, so even the love drug has a tribal dark side. This really changes how you might think about something like religion, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Haidt offers a very different perspective on religion compared to, say, the new atheists, who often frame it primarily as false beliefs or a kind of mental virus.
Right, the idea that it's just superstition holding us back.
Instead, Haidt merges insights from Darwinian evolution and Durkheim sociology. He argues that religion, whatever its theological truth claims, has been a profoundly powerful evolutionary adaptation for binding groups together. It helps solve the massive cooperation problem. How do you get large groups of non-relatives to trust each other, work together, and compete effectively against other groups?
So religion acts like social glue, creates moral capital.
Precisely. Religions, with their shared beliefs, rituals, myths, and practices, create what Haidt calls moral capital. That web of shared norms, trust, and mutual obligation that allows large-scale cooperation to flourish. Think about the role of gods. From a functional perspective, believing in watchful, potentially punishing gods can be a very effective way to deter cheating and enforce oaths within a community, acting like invisible policemen and fostering trust. He suggests gods might be cultural innovations, like maypoles, around which communities could coalesce and thrive.
That's a fascinating functional view, and he stresses it's not just about belief, right? It's about belonging.
Yes, very much so. Haidt emphasizes that empirical studies often show it's the belongingness aspect of religion, the social connections, the shared activities, the community support that correlates most strongly with positive outcomes like generosity, volunteering, and general neighborliness, often more so than just private belief in specific doctrines.
Okay, so belonging matters more than just believing. This all leads Haidt to define morality in a very specific way, doesn't it? A functional way.
That's right. He offers this definition. Moral systems are interlocking sets of values, virtues, norms, practices, identities, institutions, technologies, and evolved psychological mechanisms that work together to suppress or regulate self-interest and make cooperative societies possible.
That's quite a mouthful. Let's unpack it slightly. It's about suppressing selfishness to enable cooperation.
Yes, that's the core function. And notice what it includes: values, virtues, but also practices, institutions, even evolved psychology. It's a whole system. And crucially, Haidt stresses this definition is descriptive, not normative.
Meaning it describes how morality works, not necessarily what should be considered moral.
Exactly. It's trying to explain the phenomenon of morality as it exists in human societies. And because it's descriptive, it could technically apply to any cohesive group that successfully suppresses selfishness for group benefit, including potentially groups we might find abhorrent, like cults or fascist regimes. High moral capital, strong group cohesion, can be used for good or ill. It binds, but it can also blind.
Right, that binding and blinding effect. It's powerful. So morality isn't just about individual right and wrong. It's this complex, evolved system for group living. Okay, now we have this comprehensive picture. Intuitive judgments, the 6 moral foundations, our groupish nature. How do we use all this understanding to navigate the intense political polarization we see today?
Well, Haidt argues that understanding these foundations is the first step towards bridging the divide. He suggests thinking about the different political orientations: liberalism, libertarianism, social conservatism, not just as opposing forces, but as potentially complementary ones, each offering a unique kind of wisdom, like a yin and yang.
Yin and yang. So each side brings something valuable to the table, even if they focus on different things.
That's the idea. Liberalism, for example, with its intense focus on the care-arm foundation, is exceptionally good at spotting suffering and oppression, especially for vulnerable groups. Haidt points to examples like liberals leading the charge to get lead out of gasoline, which had massive positive effects, including reducing crime rates decades later. Their antennae are just highly tuned to suffering and the need for change to alleviate it.
Okay, so liberal wisdom is about care and fighting oppression. What about the others? Libertarians.
Libertarians bring a crucial understanding of the Liberty-Pression Foundation, but often applied universally, and they grasp the power of free markets and individual choice. They are acutely aware of how government intervention, even with noble goals, can backfire, stifle innovation, create massive unintended consequences, and lead to coercion. Think about their critiques of overly complex regulations or centrally planned economies. They warn against the road to serfdom paved with good intentions.
A check on overreach, basically. And social conservatives. What's their unique wisdom, according to Haidt?
Their wisdom lies in intuitively understanding the importance of the other foundations: loyalty, authority, and sanctity for creating and preserving moral capital. They recognize that society doesn't just run on individual rights. It needs strong institutions, shared values, traditions, trust things like staple families, communities, religions. They act as a sort of moral exoskeleton. They grasp that you can't just tear down institutions or radically change norms without potentially damaging the social fabric, the very hive that allows the bees to cooperate.
So liberals see victims, libertarians see coercion, conservatives see the foundations of social order.
That's a useful shorthand, yeah. Haidt argues a healthy society probably needs the insights and critiques from all 3 perspectives to balance each other out.
That's a much more constructive way to look at political differences than just seeing the other side as misguided or worse, evil. But people do often see the other side as evil, don't they?
They absolutely do. Haidt calls this tendency Manichaeism, after the ancient religion that saw the world as a cosmic battle between pure good and pure evil. He argues that modern politics, especially in the U.S., has become increasingly Manichaean. Part of this is due to ideological sorting. Since the 90s especially, the 2 parties have become much more ideologically pure. Liberals clustering in one party, conservatives in the other. There's less overlap, fewer cross-cutting identities.
So we live in different moral worlds almost. Makes cooperation really hard.
Incredibly hard. And Haidt is pretty clear that just telling everyone to be nicer or try to understand the other side probably isn't enough on its own. The incentive structures in politics, in media, often reward polarization and demonization. He suggests we need actual changes to political procedures, institutions, maybe even the physical environments where politicians work, to foster more cooperation and less tribalism.
So structural changes are needed, but on an individual level, if someone listening wants to have more constructive conversations across these divides, drawing on Haidt's work, what's the practical advice?
Well, first, Haidt stresses the importance of connection before correction, or as he puts it, open your heart first. Remember the rider and the elephant. You can't persuade the rider with facts if the elephant is leaning away. You need to build some trust, some rapport, Find common ground first. Even one friendly interaction can make the elephant lean in a bit.
Connect, then try to convince. Makes sense. Oh, what else?
Second, really try to understand the other person's moral matrix. Which of the 6 foundations are most important to them? Don't just assume they're wrong or immoral. Try to see the issue through their set of moral taste buds. Maybe you can frame your point in a way that resonates with their core values, not just yours.
Speak their moral language in a way.
Exactly. And finally, remember that conservative insight about moral capital, the don't destroy the hive principle. Even if you disagree strongly with a tradition or institution, consider the potential effects on social cohesion and trust before advocating for radical change. Sometimes, incremental adjustments are wiser than trying to tear everything down because you might inadvertently destroy the very foundations that allow society to function.
So, connect first, understand their moral matrix, and be mindful of the unseen social fabric. That's challenging, but sounds essential.
It is challenging, but the righteous mind gives us the tools to understand why it's so challenging and maybe, just maybe, how to do it a little better. The core message is powerful and frankly a bit humbling. Morality evolved to bind us into teams, partly so we could compete with other teams. That binding is essential, but it inevitably comes with some blinding.
Which leaves us, as always, with something to reflect on. How do we nurture that vital sense of belonging, that parochial love for our own groups, our communities, our nations, which Haidt argues is part of our nature without letting it completely blind us to the humanity and perspectives of others, especially in a shared civic space?
Yeah, how do we build that cross-group trust and understanding without sacrificing the cohesion that makes our own communities work? What kinds of institutions, practices, or maybe even shared experiences could help us do that?
Finding that balance between the 90% chimp and the 10% bee, between binding and blinding, it seems like the central challenge. The journey to truly understand our own righteous minds and how to live together better is definitely far from over.